The Imperial Dragon Palace stretched across the sky like a frozen waterfall made of crystal and starlight. Every surface gleamed with perfection, polished daily by workers who knew better than to leave even the smallest smudge. The dragons who ruled here believed their palace reflected their superiority over every other species in the galaxy. Everything had to be flawless, cold, and untouchable. Just like them. Deep in the eastern wing, far from the throne rooms and banquet halls where powerful dragons made decisions that shaped entire star systems, a small figure lay curled on an enormous bed. Prince Thyran was only 8 solar cycles old, which made him barely more than a hatchling by dragon standards. His room sat in a section of the palace that most dragons had forgotten existed. The hallways leading here were dark. No servants came anymore. No physicians checked on him. Even his own father, Emperor Dravik, hadn't walked through that door in nearly 3 weeks. Thyran's scales, which should have glowed with the brilliant gold of dragon royalty, had faded to the color of ash after a fire dies. His small chest rose and fell with shallow, painful breaths. Every inhale felt like swallowing broken glass. His fever burned so hot that the silk sheets beneath him had grown damp with sweat. He didn't cry anymore. He'd learned that no one came when he did. The palace physicians had examined him twice, months ago when the illness first appeared. They'd run their claws over his scales, checked his throat, and whispered among themselves in the clinical way that doctors do when they've already given up. Their diagnosis came swift and final: genetic weakness. In dragon society, those 2 words carried the weight of a death sentence. Dragons prided themselves on strength, on power, on the ability to survive anything. A prince who couldn't even fight off a simple illness had no place in their world. The whispers started immediately. Court dragons, distant cousins and political rivals, spoke in hushed tones about how merciful it would be to let nature take its course. Some suggested that Emperor Dravik should have another heir, a stronger one. A few even hinted that keeping Thyran alive dishonored the entire bloodline. In a culture where showing weakness meant losing everything, a sick child became an embarrassment better left to fade away in a forgotten corner. Laura Bennett had been working at the Imperial Dragon Palace for 6 months. She was part of a human contract crew hired to clean the massive structure. The dragons didn't like doing manual labor themselves, and humans needed the work. The pay was decent, the contract was for 2 years, and Laura sent most of her earnings back to Earth to help her sister finish medical school. She didn't complain about the long hours or the way most dragons looked through her as if she were invisible. Work was work. She'd been assigned to the Eastern Wing 3 weeks ago. Nobody wanted that section. It was vast, isolated, and gave her co-workers an uneasy feeling they couldn't quite explain. Laura didn't mind the solitude. She could work at her own pace, listen to music through her earpiece, and avoid the more arrogant dragons who seemed to enjoy making the human workers feel small. On this particular shift, Laura was polishing the corridor floors when she heard it. A soft, broken sound that didn't belong in the silent hallways. She pulled out one earbud and listened. There it was again. A whimper, weak and desperate, like a small animal caught in a trap. Palace regulations were clear. Human workers stayed in designated areas. They didn't wander. They certainly didn't enter private royal chambers. But Laura had younger brothers back on Earth, and that sound triggered something deeper than any rule or regulation. She followed it to a massive door carved with dragon symbols she couldn't read. The door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room beyond took her breath away. It was enormous, built for a creature 10 times her size, with ceilings that soared into darkness and windows that overlooked 3 moons rising over an alien landscape. But what grabbed her attention was the small figure on the bed. The dragon prince was tiny, barely bigger than a large dog, with scales that looked like they were dying. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged and uneven. Laura's training, her fear of consequences, her knowledge that touching dragon royalty without permission could mean execution, all of that vanished in an instant. She crossed the room in 6 quick steps, her cleaning supplies forgotten. She'd taken basic first aid courses before leaving Earth. She knew what a fever looked like, what labored breathing meant. This child was dying, and he was dying alone. She pressed her hand against his forehead. The heat radiating from his scales nearly burned her palm. His eyes fluttered open for just a moment. They were gold, like sunlight through amber, and they held a question that broke her heart. He was too weak to speak, but she understood. He wanted to know if she was another person who would look at him and walk away. Laura made her decision in less than a heartbeat. She grabbed her cleaning tarp, the heavy waterproof fabric she used to cover furniture when she worked. She wrapped it around the small dragon as gently as she could, lifting him from the bed. He weighed almost nothing, as if the illness had hollowed him out from the inside. She held him against her chest and headed for the door. The service corridors became her ally. Laura had spent 6 months learning every back hallway and maintenance passage in this massive structure. She knew which routes the dragons never used, which cameras had blind spots, which doors stayed unlocked during shift changes. She moved quickly but carefully, keeping Thyran wrapped and hidden. His breathing grew more shallow with each minute. She started running. The human medical bay sat in the lower levels of the station, tucked between storage facilities and the workers' dormitories. It wasn't fancy. The equipment was older, second-hand stuff passed down from better-funded facilities. But it worked, and for the 300 humans living and working at the Imperial Dragon Station, it was enough. Dr. Michael Foster ran the place with a small staff of nurses and one overworked medical assistant. He'd been treating sprained ankles, common colds, and the occasional workplace injury for 2 years without incident. That quiet routine shattered the moment Laura kicked open the medical bay doors. Michael looked up from his desk and froze. Laura stood in the doorway, breathing hard from her sprint through the corridors, holding something wrapped in a dirty cleaning tarp. But it was the golden scaled tail hanging out from the bundle that made his blood run cold. "No," he said immediately, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Absolutely not. Laura, whatever you're thinking, the answer is no." "He's dying," Laura said flatly. She moved past him toward the examination table, not asking for permission. She laid the small bundle down and carefully unwrapped it. Prince Thyran lay there, barely conscious, his breathing coming in short, desperate gasps. Michael's hands trembled as he backed away. "Do you understand what you've done? That's dragon royalty. We can't just treat a member of the Imperial family without authorization. They'll execute us. They'll execute everyone in this facility. Then they'll have to execute me," Laura shot back. She was already checking Thyran's pulse, her fingers finding the spot on his neck where his life beat weakly. "Because I'm not letting a child die when we can help him. Look at him, Michael. Just look at him." Michael did look. His medical training fought against his survival instinct. The child was in bad shape, anyone could see that. His scales had lost their color, his body temperature was dangerously high, and his respiratory system was clearly in distress. Every instinct Michael had as a doctor screamed at him to help. But every ounce of common sense told him this would end badly for everyone involved. Jennifer Hayes, the head nurse, appeared from the supply room. She took one look at the situation and immediately started pulling equipment. She didn't say a word, just began prepping the examination table with the efficiency of someone who'd made her choice. Sometimes the right thing and the safe thing weren't the same, and she'd clearly picked her side. "Fine," Michael said, his voice tight with fear and resignation. "But if anyone asks, you two forced me at gunpoint." "We don't have guns," Jennifer pointed out while attaching monitoring equipment to Thyran's small body. "Then make something up." Michael approached the table, his doctor's mind finally overriding everything else. He began his examination working quickly. Thyran's temperature was 41 degrees Celsius. His heart rate was elevated. His breathing was severely restricted. Michael checked his throat and found inflammation. He ran his scanner over the small dragon's body, looking for internal damage, infections, tumors, anything that might explain the condition. The results started coming back within minutes. Michael stared at the screen, his confusion growing with each data point. He ran the scan again, certain he'd made a mistake. The numbers came back identical. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, pulling up genetic markers and comparing them against the limited dragon medical database available to human physicians. "What doesn't make sense?" Laura asked, still holding Thyran's small clawed hand. "The dragon physicians diagnosed him with genetic weakness, right? Some kind of inherited condition that makes him too fragile to survive." "That's what I heard the palace staff saying." Michael shook his head, pointing at the screen. "There's nothing genetically wrong with him. His DNA structure is completely normal for a young dragon. Actually, it's better than normal. This kid should be incredibly healthy." "Then why is he dying?" Jennifer asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Michael ran another scan, this time focusing on Thyran's respiratory system and bloodstream. He analyzed the composition of fluids in the prince's lungs. Then he saw it. His eyes widened. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." "What?" Laura demanded. "It's an allergic reaction. A severe one." Michael pulled up the chemical analysis on the main screen so they could all see it. "His system is flooded with histamines. His airways are inflamed, his body is attacking itself. It's anaphylaxis but chronic. Something in his environment is poisoning him slowly." Jennifer leaned closer to the screen. "What's he allergic to?" Michael filtered through the data, isolating the foreign compounds triggering the reaction. Chromium particles. Specifically, vaporized chromium combined with some kind of organic resin. He looked at Laura. Is there anything in his room that burns? Incense, candles, ceremonial fires? Laura thought back to the prince's chamber. She'd noticed the smell immediately when she entered, that thick, sweet smoke that hung in the air. The hallways leading to his room are full of these burners. They're everywhere in that section of the palace. Some kind of ceremonial thing, I think. The smoke is constant. That's what's killing him, Michael said, something like anger creeping into his voice. Dragon physiology can't process chromium the way most species can. Their respiratory systems are designed for clean air, not constant exposure to metallic compounds. It's probably some ancient tradition nobody questioned. So the dragon physicians missed it? Jennifer asked. Or they didn't want to admit they missed it. Michael began preparing treatment. An allergy to ceremonial incense would mean their own traditions are flawed, that their sacred practices are actually harmful. For a species as proud as dragons, that's impossible to accept. It's easier to blame genetic weakness than admit their culture is slowly poisoning their own children. He loaded a syringe with antihistamines, modified for dragon biology based on the limited research available. This is going to be trial and error. Human medicine and dragon medicine don't usually overlap. But the basic principles of treating an allergic reaction should be universal. Laura watched as Michael administered the injection. For several long minutes nothing happened. Thyran continued his labored breathing, his small body still and hot beneath the monitoring equipment. Then slowly his breathing began to ease. The desperate gasping softened into something more regular. The monitors showed his heart rate beginning to stabilize. It's working, Jennifer whispered. Over the next 3 hours they watched the prince transform. They gave him oxygen, fluids, and additional medication to reduce the inflammation in his airways. Color began returning to his scales, the ash gray fading as hints of gold emerged underneath. His temperature dropped degree by degree toward normal. When he finally opened his eyes, they were clear and focused instead of glazed with fever. Michael sat back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied. A simple antihistamine and oxygen therapy. That's all it took. Not some rare genetic condition. Not some incurable disease. Just an environmental allergy that any first-year medical student could have. 3 days passed in the human medical bay, and Prince Thyran experienced something completely foreign to him. For the first time in his short life, people actually cared whether he lived or died. On the first morning, he woke to find Laura sitting beside his bed, reading something on a digital tablet. She looked up when she heard him stirring and smiled. Not the formal, calculating smile he'd seen on dragon courtiers who wanted something from his father. Just a genuine expression of relief that he was awake. "Hey there," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" Thyran tried to speak but his throat was still raw. Laura helped him sit up and brought him water. The simple act confused him. In the palace, servants moved with rigid efficiency, performing tasks without emotion or connection. Laura moved like she actually wanted to help, like his comfort mattered to her personally. "The doctor says you're going to be fine," Laura continued, adjusting his pillows. "Your body just needs time to recover. You've been breathing poison for months, so it'll take a few days to get your strength back." Poison. The word stuck in Thyran's mind. He'd been told his weakness was genetic, something broken inside him that proved he wasn't worthy of being dragon royalty. But it wasn't him at all. It was the ceremonial incense that burned endlessly in the royal wing, the sacred smoke that honored his ancestors. The traditions his father valued above everything, including his own son. Dr. Foster came by every few hours to check vitals and adjust medications. He explained everything he was doing in simple terms, treating Thyran like a person who deserved to understand his own treatment. In the Dragon Palace, physicians had spoken over him, discussing his condition as if he weren't even present. Michael talked to him directly, asked him questions and actually listened to the answers. But it was the other humans who truly amazed Thyran. Jennifer brought him warm soup when he could finally eat solid food. She told him stories about her daughter back on Earth while she checked his temperature. Thomas, one of the maintenance workers, stopped by during his lunch break and taught Thyran a simple card game using a deck he kept in his pocket. Rita from the cafeteria snuck him a chocolate bar, winking and telling him not to tell the doctor. These were cleaning staff, mechanics, cooks. People the dragons considered so far beneath them that they barely acknowledged their existence. Yet here they were, going out of their way to make a sick child feel less alone. They asked for nothing in return. They didn't calculate political advantage or jockey for position. They were just kind because kindness was what decent people offered to those who needed it. On the second day, Laura brought her tablet and showed Thyran pictures of Earth. He stared in wonder at oceans, forests, and mountains. She told him about her hometown, a small place with more trees than buildings. She showed him photos of her family, including her 2 younger brothers who were close to his age. "Do they know about me?" Thyran asked, his voice still raspy but getting stronger. "I sent them a message," Laura admitted. "I didn't use your name or anything. Just told them I was helping a kid who'd been really sick. My brother Danny wanted me to tell you that being sick doesn't make you weak. He had pneumonia last year and missed 2 months of school. Said the hardest part was everyone treating him like he was broken." Thyran felt something warm spread through his chest. A human child on a planet he'd never visited understood what he'd been going through better than anyone in his own palace. By the 3rd day, Thyran's scales had returned to their proper golden color. He could breathe without pain, walk without dizziness, and his fever was completely gone. His strength was returning rapidly now that he wasn't being slowly poisoned anymore. But he found himself not wanting to leave the medical bay. Children from the station's small school started visiting during their free time. They were human kids, children of workers stationed here for various contract jobs. At first they were nervous around him. He was a dragon, after all, and their parents had taught them to be respectful and cautious around dragons. But Thyran's size and obvious youth put them at ease. Within an hour they were teaching him games and showing him their schoolwork. A girl named Katie brought her collection of drawings and asked Thyran if dragons really breathed fire. He demonstrated with a small flame, careful to keep it controlled, and the children gasped in delight rather than fear. Another boy, Peter, shared his snack and asked what it was like living in a palace. Thyran found himself telling the truth, that it was cold and lonely, and he'd been happier in the past 3 days than he could remember being in years. Laura watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and growing concern. She knew this couldn't last. The palace guards would find Thyran eventually, and when they did, all of this would end. The prince would return to his isolated wing, to a father who'd abandoned him, to a court that saw him as an embarrassment. That evening, after the children had gone home and the medical bay had grown quiet, Thyran asked Laura the question that had been building inside him for days. "Why did you help me?" His golden eyes studied her face, genuinely confused. "You didn't know who I was. You risked your life. In my world, nobody does anything without expecting something in return. What do you want from me?" Laura sat down beside his bed, considering her answer carefully. She wanted to give him something true, something he could hold on to when he returned to his cold palace. "I helped you because you needed help and I could give it," she said simply. "That's what people should do for each other. It doesn't matter if you're a prince or a cleaner or anything else. You were a kid who was sick and alone and that wasn't right. So I did what I could to make it right." "But you didn't calculate advantage," Thyran insisted, struggling with the concept. "You didn't think about what it would cost you or what you might gain. How do you make decisions without calculating?" "I guess we just feel what's right and do it," Laura said. "Sometimes thinking too much gets in the way of doing good things. Your brain starts listing all the reasons you shouldn't help, all the ways it might go wrong. But your heart knows better. Your heart just sees someone hurting and wants to stop the hurt." Thyran was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made Laura's eyes sting with tears. "I think my heart forgot how to feel anything except fear. But being here with you and Dr. Foster and everyone else, it's like something inside me woke up again. I remember what it's like to not be afraid all the time." The next morning the inevitable happened. Palace guards burst into the medical bay, weapons drawn, demanding to know where the prince was being held. They found him playing checkers with Thomas, laughing at a joke Jennifer had just told, looking healthier than he'd been in over a year. The guards were clearly confused. They'd been searching for 3 days, expecting to find their prince imprisoned or held hostage. Instead they found him comfortable, happy, and treated like any other patient. The head guard, a massive dragon named Korvax, approached Thyran with obvious relief. "Your Highness, we've been searching everywhere. Your father has been informed that you're missing. We must return you to the palace immediately." Thyran's newfound happiness crumbled. His scales seemed to dull slightly, and Laura watched the fear creep back into his eyes. But then something shifted. The prince stood up straighter, drawing on the strength he'd built over the past 3 days. "I'll come," Thyran said quietly. "But only if Laura can visit me. She saved my life. She's my friend. I want her to be allowed in the palace." Korvax looked uncomfortable. A human cleaning worker visiting a prince regularly? It was unprecedented. It violated about 17 different protocols. But the prince's tone left no room for argument. After 3 days of panic searching, Korvax wasn't about to refuse the only condition that would get Thyran back to the palace peacefully. "I'll relay your request to His Majesty," Korvax said carefully. As the guards prepared to escort Thyran back, he turned to Laura one last time. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The gratitude in his eyes said everything. But word of what had happened was already spreading through both the Dragon Palace and the human quarters. A cleaner had saved the forgotten prince with medicine dragon physicians couldn't provide. And now Emperor Dravik was demanding answers about how a lesser species had accomplished what his own court had declared impossible. Emperor Dravik arrived at the human medical sector exactly 47 hours after his son was returned to the palace. He came with an entourage of 12 advisors, 6 royal physicians, and enough guards to invade a small moon. The humans working in the lower levels felt the temperature drop as the massive dragons filled corridors designed for creatures half their size. Laura was in the middle of her cleaning shift when the summons came. A palace official, looking both terrified and important, informed her that the emperor himself demanded her presence. Michael received the same message in his quarters. Neither of them had slept well since Thyran left. They both knew this confrontation was coming. The medical bay had been cleared. Every human worker in the facility had been ordered to their quarters. When Laura and Michael arrived, they found themselves facing the most powerful being in 12 star systems. Emperor Dravik was enormous, his crimson scales gleaming like molten metal, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Laura's knees want to buckle. She forced herself to stand straight. "You are the human who took my son," Dravik said. It wasn't a question. His voice rumbled like distant thunder, filling the entire space. "I am," Laura replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your Highness. Without permission. Without authority. You removed a member of the imperial family from the palace and brought him here." Dravik gestured at the modest medical bay with barely concealed contempt. "To this place." One of his advisors, a sleek silver dragon named Velrath, stepped forward. "The punishment for touching royalty without authorization is death, by imperial law. The punishment for removing a royal family member from the palace is also death. You have committed 2 capital offenses." Michael started to speak, but Laura cut him off. She'd carried Thyran through those corridors. She'd made the choice. This was her responsibility. "I did what needed to be done," she said simply. "Your son was dying. Nobody was helping him. So I did." "You presume to know better than trained dragon physicians?" Another advisor, this one deep blue with golden eyes, spoke with dripping condescension. "You, a cleaning worker with no medical credentials, decided our diagnosis was wrong?" "I didn't decide anything," Laura shot back. "I just saw a sick kid and got him to a doctor. Dr. Foster is the one who actually figured out what was wrong." All eyes turned to Michael. He swallowed hard, then straightened his shoulders. If he was going to die for saving a child's life, he'd at least die telling the truth. "Your Highness, your physicians diagnosed Prince Thyran with genetic weakness. They were wrong." Michael pulled up the medical scans on his tablet, projecting them onto the wall. "Your son has no genetic defects. He has a severe allergic reaction to chromium-based ceremonial incense. His condition is completely treatable with standard antihistamines and removal from the allergen source." The silence that followed was deafening. The dragon physicians and Dravik's entourage shifted uncomfortably. Velrath's scales seemed to pale slightly. "Impossible," one of the royal physicians finally said. "We conducted thorough examinations. The prince's condition was clearly genetic." "Then you didn't look hard enough," Michael said, surprised by his own boldness. "Or maybe you didn't want to find an answer that would embarrass the court. It's easier to blame genetics than admit your sacred traditions are poisoning your children." Another advisor lunged forward, but Dravik raised one massive claw, stopping him instantly. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, studying the medical scans with an intelligence that reminded everyone why he ruled an empire. "Show me," Dravik commanded. Michael walked them through every detail. The blood work showing elevated histamines. The respiratory inflammation consistent with chronic exposure to metallic particles. The chemical analysis of compounds found in Thyran's system that perfectly matched the ceremonial incense composition. The dramatic improvement after treatment with human medicine and removal from the contaminated environment. With each piece of evidence, the dragon physicians looked more uncomfortable. Velrath tried to interrupt twice with technical objections, but Dravik silenced him. The Emperor was many things, but he wasn't stupid. The evidence was undeniable. "Take me to observation," Dravik said suddenly. They led him to the window overlooking the medical bay's recovery room. Thyran was there, having returned that morning for a follow-up examination. But he wasn't alone. Katie and Peter had stopped by after school, and the three children sat on the floor playing some kind of game with cards. Thyran's scales glowed with health. His laughter echoed through the glass, bright and genuine. Dravik stood motionless, watching his son. Laura moved beside him, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to speak. "When's the last time you heard him laugh like that?" she asked quietly. The Emperor didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The thunder was gone, replaced by something raw and painful. "I cannot remember." "He thought you abandoned him," Laura continued, knowing she was probably signing her death warrant but unable to stop. "He thought his weakness disappointed you so much that you couldn't even look at him. He was 8 years old and completely alone, convinced he was dying because he wasn't strong enough to be your son." Dravik's claws scraped against the observation window frame, leaving deep gouges in the metal. "I stayed away because I could not bear to watch him fade. Every visit reminded me that I was losing him and could do nothing to stop it." "You could have sat with him," Laura said. "You could have held his hand. You could have let him know that he mattered more than his strength or his status. He's a child. He needed his father." Through the window, Thyran looked up and saw Dravik watching. The joy drained from his face instantly, replaced by that familiar fear and shame. He started to stand, to assume whatever formal posture was expected of failed dragon princes. But then something happened that would be talked about for generations. Emperor Dravik, ruler of the Dragon Empire, the most powerful being in known space, pressed his clawed hand against the glass. And his son, tiny Prince Thyran, walked forward and pressed his much smaller hand against the same spot from the other side. Velrath cleared his throat. "Your Highness, we should remove the prince from this facility immediately and issue appropriate punishments for the humans who—" "Be silent," Dravik said, his voice carrying absolute authority. He turned to face his advisors and physicians. "My son was dying. You all told me it was inevitable, that his genetics were flawed, that nothing could be done. I believed you because you were the experts, because questioning you seemed impossible." He gestured toward Michael and Laura. "These humans, one a cleaner and one a physician with limited resources, saved my son's life in 3 days. They cured what you declared incurable. They gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "It was a simple condition," one of the physicians protested weakly. "We would have eventually—" "You would have let him die," Dravik interrupted, his voice like ice. "You were so convinced of your own superiority, so unwilling to consider that our traditions might be flawed, that you condemned my heir to death rather than admit uncertainty. 6 months changed everything. The Dragon-Human Medical Exchange Program started small. Dr. Michael Foster and 3 dragon physicians working together in a converted palace wing, sharing research and comparing treatment methods. The dragons were skeptical at first, some openly hostile to the idea that they needed to learn from humans. But Michael had something they couldn't argue with: results. The second breakthrough came within 3 weeks. A young dragon named Seraphina had been suffering from chronic pain in her wings for 2 years. Dragon medicine had tried everything, finally concluding she had a rare nerve disorder that would eventually leave her unable to fly. Michael examined her for 20 minutes and diagnosed a simple vitamin deficiency. 3 months of supplements later, Seraphina was flying again. Then came the discovery about scale rot, a condition that affected older dragons and was considered an inevitable part of aging. A human dermatologist visiting from Earth recognized it immediately as a fungal infection, treatable with antifungal medication that had existed for centuries. Within days, dragons who'd suffered for years found relief. The program expanded rapidly. Michael now led a team of 40 researchers, half human and half dragon, working in a state-of-the-art facility funded by the Imperial Treasury. They'd identified 17 conditions that dragon medicine had considered incurable but responded to human treatments. They'd also found 12 areas where dragon medical techniques far surpassed human capabilities, particularly in cellular regeneration and genetic therapy. It became a true exchange, not one species teaching the other, but both learning together. The dragons who initially resisted started seeing their patients recover. Pride mattered less when you watched someone's grandmother walk without pain for the first time in a decade. Science didn't care about which species discovered it first. It only cared about what worked. Laura still cleaned corridors. She turned down 3 promotions and 2 administrative positions. She liked her work, the simple rhythm of it, the way it let her mind wander while her hands stayed busy. But her life had changed in other ways. She visited Prince Thyran 3 times a week. At first, palace staff didn't know how to handle her presence. A human cleaner walking freely through royal corridors, sitting with the prince in his chambers, eating meals in rooms where high-ranking dragons conducted business. It violated every protocol they knew. But Thyran insisted, and his father supported him. Gradually the awkwardness faded. Guards nodded to Laura when she passed. Kitchen staff prepared extra portions at meals, knowing she'd be there. Some of the younger dragons even started asking her questions about Earth, about human culture, about why humans did things so differently. The real transformation happened in the imperial schools. Emperor Dravik's most radical decision wasn't about medicine. It was about education. He opened the Dragon Youth Academies to human children and brought in human teachers to share their perspectives. The first day was chaos. Dragon parents protested. They argued their children shouldn't be exposed to lesser species thinking. Some threatened to pull their kids out entirely. But Dravik stood firm, and slowly something remarkable happened. Dragon children discovered that human kids asked questions they'd never considered. They challenged assumptions that dragons had accepted for generations. A human teacher named Robert Patterson taught a class on problem solving where he encouraged students to question everything, even sacred traditions. At first, the young dragons were horrified. You didn't question tradition. But then they realized that asking why led to understanding, and understanding led to better solutions. Katie and Peter became minor celebrities. They were among the first human children to attend the Imperial Academy, and their presence forced everyone to reconsider old prejudices. When Katie scored highest in the entire school on a physics examination, several dragon parents had to confront their assumptions about human intelligence. When Peter helped a struggling dragon student understand mathematics by explaining it differently than the dragon teachers had, it opened eyes throughout the facility. Thyran attended the academy now, no longer isolated in his forgotten palace wing. He studied alongside dragons and humans, made friends from both species, and slowly transformed from a frightened child into a confident young prince. He still visited Laura regularly, but now their conversations had changed. He talked about his classes, his friends, his dreams for the future. He discovered a passion for medicine, inspired by watching Dr. Foster work. "I want to help people the way you helped me," Thyran told Laura one afternoon. They sat in the palace gardens, a place he'd once been too sick to visit. "I want to be someone who sees past tradition and pride to what actually matters." Laura smiled, watching the young prince who'd been left to die now talking about saving others. "You'll be an amazing doctor. Or emperor. Or whatever you choose to be. Father says I should understand every role in the empire before I rule it someday," Thyran said thoughtfully. "So I've been thinking. Maybe I should spend time working as a cleaner. You see parts of the palace nobody else notices. You helped me because you were somewhere no important dragon bothered to go." The idea of a dragon prince pushing a mop cart made Laura laugh, but she saw the wisdom in it. The most important people often were the ones everyone else overlooked. Emperor Dravik himself had changed in ways that shocked the entire galactic community. He spoke openly about his failure as a father, about how pride had nearly cost him his son. At diplomatic functions he told Laura's story, not as an embarrassment but as a lesson. He described the day a human cleaner cared more for his child than his entire court had. Other species paid attention. If the mighty dragon empire could admit its mistakes and learn from humans, maybe they could examine their own prejudices. The crystalline collective, which had always considered themselves intellectually superior to carbon-based life forms, initiated their own exchange programs. The hive worlds, usually isolated and suspicious, opened discussions about sharing medical research. The annual Galactic Council Summit became the stage for Dravik's most significant proposal. Laura watched from the gallery, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to miss this moment. Thyran sat beside her, his scales gleaming gold in the light from the chamber's massive windows. Dravik stood before representatives from 43 different species and told them about his son. About ceremonial incense and misdiagnosis. About pride that nearly became murder. About a human cleaner who saw a child instead of a political calculation. "I propose the Bennett Accord," Dravik announced, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. "A treaty establishing that no species should be barred from offering aid based on perceived status, rank, or technological level. That medical knowledge should be shared freely across all civilized worlds. That we judge the value of help by its effectiveness, not by who offers it." The chamber erupted in debate. Some species objected, worried about protecting proprietary research or maintaining their own superiority. But others saw what Dravik had seen, that cooperation made everyone stronger, that learning from each other didn't diminish anyone, and that pride was worthless compared to the lives it cost. The vote took 3 hours. In the end, the Bennett Accord passed with 87% approval. It would be implemented across all member systems within the year. Laura watched history being made and felt deeply uncomfortable about having her name attached to it. After the session ended, reporters and diplomats swarmed, all wanting to speak with the human cleaner who'd changed an empire. Laura slipped out through a maintenance corridor, using the same kinds of passages she'd used to save Thyran 6 months earlier. She found her way back to the station, changed into her work clothes and returned to her scheduled shift. She was cleaning the corridor outside the medical bay when Michael found her an hour later. "You know they're looking everywhere for you, right?" he said, leaning against the wall. "The Emperor wants to give you some kind of medal. There are at least 15 news crews trying to get an interview." "I know," Laura said, continuing to polish the floor panels. "That's why I'm here. You saved a child's life and accidentally reformed an empire. You could have any job you wanted. Any position. The council offered to make you an official diplomatic advisor." "I like cleaning," Laura said simply. "It's honest work. It's useful. And nobody expects me to make speeches or attend ceremonies. I just wanted to help a sick kid. The rest of this wasn't my idea." Michael laughed. "You're possibly the only person in the galaxy who would turn down fame and power to keep mopping floors." "The floors need mopping," Laura pointed out. "And somebody has to do it." She finished her section and moved on to the next corridor. A group of young dragons passed by, students from the academy heading to afternoon classes. 2 of them were walking with human children, all talking and laughing together in a mix of languages. They nodded respectfully to Laura as they passed. "Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett," one of the dragons said politely. "Good afternoon," Laura replied. "Don't be late for class." They hurried on and Laura returned to her work. This was what mattered to her. Not the treaties or the medals or the recognition. Just the small moments where different species treated each other with basic decency. Where children learned together. Where a sick kid could get help from whoever was willing to give it. Prince Thyran found her an hour later, having escaped his own crowd of well-wishers and officials. He'd gotten good at using the service corridors too, learning from Laura's example. "They're calling you a hero," he said, settling down on the floor beside where she worked. He'd long ago stopped worrying about dignity and protocol when it was just the 2 of them. "I'm a cleaner who did what anyone should have done," Laura corrected. "That's what makes you a hero," Thyran said quietly. "You didn't see a prince or a political opportunity. You saw someone who needed help. You didn't calculate the risk or the reward. You just helped because it was right." Laura sat back, looking at the young dragon who'd been dying alone 6 months ago. He was healthy now, happy, surrounded by friends and opportunities. His father actually talked to him. His future was bright. "Your people are learning that wisdom and compassion aren't about scales or strength or status," Laura said. "They're learning that the most important person isn't always the one with the most power. Sometimes it's just whoever chooses kindness when everyone else chooses convenience." Thyran nodded, understanding. "Father says that empires are built on strength but sustained by compassion. He says you taught him that." "I just cleaned corridors and helped a kid," Laura insisted. "Your father learned that lesson himself. He just needed to see past his pride long enough to recognize it." They sat together in the quiet hallway, a human cleaner and a dragon prince, while overhead the empire they'd accidentally reformed continued changing in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. But down here in the service corridors where real work happened, things were simpler. There was a job to do, people who needed help, and the choice to be kind when kindness mattered most. Laura stood up, gathering her supplies. She still had 3 more sections to clean before her shift ended. Thyran walked with her for a while, talking about his studies, before heading back to his own responsibilities. Behind them, the Empire learned what one human cleaner had always known, that everyone deserves help when they need it, regardless of who they are or where they come from. And sometimes, the person who changes everything is simply the one who cared enough to try.